Welcome back and welcome to Town Square. It's a project where we ask you, our viewers, to drive the discussion on important topics. Now, after the last few weeks, we've asked you to share your thoughts on the topic of bullying. October is National Bullying Prevention Month, so we thought it would be fitting to get your input on it. We put together a survey. Here are some of the results. Of the 247 respondents, a full 91% say they have a child, friend, or relative who has been bullied. 83% said they were bullied themselves. 85% said the bullying happened on school property. According to StopBullying.gov, bullying is defined as an unwanted, aggressive behavior among school-aged children that involves real or at least perceived power imbalance. The behavior is repeated or has the potential to be repeated over time. The website also says there are 3 types of bullies: verbal, social, or relational bullies, and physical. In our survey results, 58% of those who responded said either they or their child were verbally abused. 34% said social bullying was the problem, and 27% said the behavior turned physical. So this afternoon, we begin with one family who decided to come forward with their story. KOMU8's Leanne Danier joins us with the story of a Jefferson City 7-year-old.
The stories came from Columbia, Huntsville, Moberly, and almost every pocket of our viewing area. But Kent and Alicia Dunwoody from Jefferson City invited us into their home to tell us their story. Their child is just one of the 3 million children who say they're bullied across the country. We share the story of the family who's speaking out against bullying at their school. Parents put their faith in educators every day to not only teach their children to read and solve math problems, but to keep them safe.
I don't think it's safe when my daughter gets assaulted 3 times in the same day and blood's drawn, bruises, scratch marks are left. I don't define that as safe.
Hundreds of Mid-Missourians joined our conversation about bullying. They shared stories of teasing in hallways, nervous walks home from school. One student shared she contemplated suicide after the teasing became unbearable. Kent and Alicia Dunwoody live in Jefferson City. Their 7-year-old daughter, whose image we're keeping private, is a 2nd grader at Thorpe Gordon Elementary School.
She's fun-loving. She's very giving. She seems like, the kind of person that would do anything for anybody, and she's, she's a hugger. She loves, she loves people.
But just a week into the start of this school year, she told her parents about the name calling.
Like stupid, she's been called fat before.
But an incident on September 9th during a PE class sent them over the edge.
Well, she told me that 3 kids had hit her, kicked her, scratched her, punched her. So I pulled over in the parking lot immediately. I checked her out over the truck, and you could see the scratch marks, the bruises. Her boot was broke. Her thumb was bleeding, like where they almost ripped her thumbnail off.
Dunwoody immediately took his daughter to the principal. He says the principal changed her class and has done his due diligence to deal with matters as they arise.
She loves learning. They do a great job. Somewhere along the lines throughout that system, something has broke or has not been enforced.
Jefferson City Public Schools would not go on camera for this story, but released this statement. Unfortunately, state and federal regulations prohibit us as a district from commenting on individual situations dealing with student behavior. That said, the Jefferson City Public Schools take very seriously every incident reported to us, whether it is a case of bullying or students simply not getting along. Our staff works to find a resolution that is in the best interest of every student involved. Missouri state law requires 2 things. First, that all students and parents receive a written policy of discipline, and that all staff must report any instance of violence they see at school. KOMU8 News spent hours interviewing multiple families who ultimately decided they were not comfortable being on camera. Many said coming forward was too great a risk for their child. Many of those parents said bullying policies, definitions, and reporting requirements are too vague in mid-Missouri. The Dunwoodys say they spoke out because a larger issue is at play.
We want it fixed, not just for our child, but every other child out there is getting bullied, picked on, so it doesn't lead to further issues down the road.
Bullying experts say keeping kids safe starts with listening and being persistent about reporting bullying. I spoke with about a dozen families over the last few weeks. My biggest takeaway from those conversations was the frustration in understanding both what qualifies as bullying and how schools move forward when a staff member doesn't see what happened.
Thanks, Leanne. Up next, how to tell if your child is in fact being bullied.
Bullies don't like resistance. They look for kids that don't fight back usually.
We sat down with a local psychiatrist, plus we'll examine how bullying affects kids and teenagers differently. As we go to the break, more of your comments. The solution to bullying problems truly begins at home. Earlier this week, I got to speak with Dr. Robert Klein of Pediatric and Adolescent Psychology Services. I asked him about the signs that a kid is, in fact, being bullied. I also asked if there's a difference in how a child and a teenager responds to bullying.
So here are a couple ideas that I talk to parents about, that I address. Number one, the classic symptoms are big change in behavior. You know, you had a child who wasn't nervous, that doesn't want to ride the bus. Have a child that was going to school fine, and there's some resistance. Again, that could be because a child has a stomach ache and they don't want to go to school. But what you start to notice as a parent is there's symptoms that are occurring frequently, and it's a change in behavior. The other thing that I look at is what the child's talking about. So the parental trick I say is, parents, keep a log, keep a diary, discuss it with your child over time, and then you'll see the symptoms cluster. So there is a change between bully behavior in smaller kids, 7, 8, 9, 10, than there is in 15-year-olds. And so the symptoms are similar, but the teenagers tend to get depressive. That's what I see. Mm-hmm. They're sad, they're upset, irritable, you know, don't want to go to school a little bit. And here's the problem, they're embarrassed. They don't talk to you. Even the best parents I see, they don't talk to you. They'll talk to me quicker sometimes than their parents.
And we did a longer interview with Dr. Klein. You can catch the entire interview online at KOMU.com.
Well, what we do is we put bullying into a giant basket with a bunch of other behaviors that are not really bullying. And so what that does is it lessens the importance of bullying when it actually occurs.
Up next, he says we have spread the anti-bullying message so well that we may have gone too far. What's bullying and what's just kids being kids? Talk about it next. Welcome back to Town Square. We took the issue of bullying to social media, and our Facebook lit up with comments about the fact that some bullying isn't really bullying. One survey respondent said parents, educators, society as a whole needs to let kids be kids until it is an issue. But another respondent said, it's not horseplay or just kidding around. I hear that a lot. Dr. Shannon Holden, an adjunct professor at Missouri State University, says it may be a little of both. And there's a movement growing that's starting to resemble a backlash against the anti-bullying crusade.
Well, what we do is we put bullying into a giant basket with a bunch of other behaviors that are not really bullying. And so what that does is it lessens the importance of bullying when it actually occurs. There are certain behaviors called, what I like to call lack of manners. There are some students out there who truly do not know common courtesy. And so we put that into a basket called bullying when it's really not bullying. Bullying behaviors are very specific. They are a set of behaviors that are repeated by someone towards one particular person, and it could be a group that's doing it as well. But they are intended to physically intimidate someone. They're intended to embarrass someone, and it also involves an imbalance of relational power. Most people do not understand what bullying actually is. We're always looking for simple answers to questions, and so what we do is we take every unkind behavior that one student does to another student and we label it bullying, and that really lessens the importance of bullying when it actually does occur.
On the other side of the conversation are the kids being accused of being bullies. Holden says that can be a tough topic for parents. He suggests using 5 questions to determine if your child is being a bully, and you can find those 5 questions online at KOMU.com. When we come back, some final thoughts on the topic and some resources for parents. We'll also have one last check of your very rainy forecast. We'll be back right after this. We want to thank everyone who's taken part so far in our Town Square, specifically focusing on bullying. You can still weigh in on our Facebook page. It's never too late, and read our story on KOMU.com for links to resources to help guide you through the challenges of having a child who is bullied, or perhaps if you are wondering if your child is being a bully. You can also go to our website to hear more from Dr. Robert Klein and Shannon Holden. Welcome back. As many of you have told us, the face of poverty is changing. Some of you say you're living on the edge and just one bad situation from losing it all. We specifically asked for responses from people at or near poverty level. Of the 120 people who responded, about 46% considered themselves poor and 44% considered themselves near poor. About 62% said they fit the federal guidelines for living in poverty, while 38% say they did not. A family making just more than $23,000 falls below the 2014 federal poverty guidelines. And when it comes to financial challenges, we asked our respondents what concerns them most. Employment and health care were at the top of the list, followed by food, housing, and transportation. And with those numbers are real, the stories straight from our community. While many shared struggles with disabilities, homelessness, and child support, in our survey, a thread of conversation caught our attention. KOMU8's Leanne Denyer spent the last few weeks meeting with families from around our viewing area. She's here in the studio with us now to talk about the perception of poverty in our community.
We learned that many families in our community fall right on the edge, somewhere riding just above or just below the federal definition of poverty. Many say they're unsure what poverty looks like in today's world. I spoke with dozens of people, but spent an afternoon with 3 individuals who shared the intimate truths about what poverty looks like on a day-to-day basis. 3 mid-Missouri families with different backgrounds share a common bond.
Job ended, and it pretty much crushes your whole world.
You think everything's going to be a certain way, and things happen that you couldn't have predicted.
There's people out there that you wouldn't even know were actually struggling.
In Boone County, the Missouri Association for Community Action reports 1 in 5 families live in poverty. Mid-Missouri families like the ones you're about to meet say living in poverty isn't always visible from the outside. Clean clothes don't mean bills are paid, and steady employment doesn't always cover medical bills. Eric Wright lives in Columbia. He keeps his hands full with 4 boys between the ages of 1 and 8. Rent on their 3-bedroom home runs just over $700 a month.
I think the 6th will be 3 months behind on rent, 2 months behind on every single bill we got.
Dad Eric and his fiancée Geneva are both unemployed. Columbia schools help take care of the older boys through the Buddy Pack program and clothing assistance. But when little ones are involved, problems for parents can grow.
Few of our friends that don't have kids, doesn't mean it's easier for them, because it's not. It's just they don't have the stress of worrying about 4 other lives.
I didn't expect that.
Dina McMasters works as a legal secretary. 7 years ago, she packed a small bag and left a physically and mentally abusive husband. He's in prison for unrelated offenses, and now she's here, making ends meet on her own.
I'm in a category that a lot of people my age are not renting. Their life has reached a point where I was hoping mine would be at the age of 61, that I owned a home, that I had resources, that I had savings and retirement set aside, and instead I'm broke.
She has a job, health insurance. But when she adds up her costs at the end of the month, she says they exceed the income.
People have an image of someone being in poverty as being on the street, in ragged clothes, unemployed, etc., and none of those fit me, and yet I consider myself to be in an impoverished situation.
You guys have to laugh at it.
In Fulton, John Huckstep comes to the community center nearly every day for a hot meal and the company of others facing similar hardships.
Everyone's there. Everyone has their problems.
His grown son left the state. He and his wife divorced years ago.
You get a job, you get married, you get a house, you have children, and this is the American dream. And I failed at that.
But he's made a new family.
I know I've got friends here, and if I needed help, they would help me.
To meet federal poverty guidelines, a family size of 1 must only bring in slightly more than $11,000 a year. A family of 6, just over $31,000. Wright says he knows his family will be celebrating the holidays differently than many this year. He says the younger boys don't know the difference yet, but that he's taught his oldest, Tristan, to understand priorities.
He doesn't want to live in a cardboard box, but have tons of presents.
Despite owing more than $2,000 in rent, Wright says his landlords are working with him. But he says he knows generosity can only go so far sometimes.
What would happen if they told you have to go? What would you do?
It's a good question. I don't know. Can't tell you. No idea.
While they don't know each other, they all ask to share a similar message.
I can't go out and give people $1,000, but if someone comes in, they need a piece of advice, or they just need someone to talk to, I can do that.
Because whether your world is full of coloring books or rambunctious little boys, or one little girl,
she's my baby,
or a patchwork family of friends, there's someone out there who wants to help. For more details about each of these families, visit komu.com.
And I've heard people say, well, if 2 jobs isn't enough, why don't they get 3? Which is a kind of a cold perception. But that's because people aren't aware and don't see the face of hunger or need in our community.
Up next, some perspective on the issue of the working poor, plus some tips for those who need help. Welcome back to Town Square. We want to get some perspective on the changing face of poverty. Tim Rich of the United Way has spent years working with Mid-Missourians struggling to get ahead. We spoke with him earlier this week about the perception of the poor. We talked a lot about the perception of the poor, and is that person who maybe is at an intersection asking for money or their clothes, and they look what we perceive to be homeless or living in poverty, but so many people who look just like your neighbor or your family are in fact living in poverty or almost.
That's exactly true. We generally, when we think of people in poverty, we think of those families that have grown up in housing projects or who have been on welfare assistance or something like that. But there are a whole number of folks, especially after the decline in the economy. A lot of folks went back to work, but they're not working full-time with full-time benefits. It's several jobs and it's less benefits. And so we see people on a regular basis that are in that kind of that crack. And it's tough when you think about that, because very often those people are somebody that's right next to you. We forget about those folks who are right on that edge, living really paycheck to paycheck, hand to mouth.
Yeah, and certainly trying to maintain that perception of, no, we're doing fine. It's because there's a lot of ego involved and a lot that people need to know. There are services and there are ways that people can help. What are some of the ones that you see getting overlooked as far as services that you wish people would get the word out about with all the agencies you deal with in the United Way?
Well, certainly looking at food assistance, and the problem with it is, especially for those who have been working, there's such a stigma about being in poverty or being in need that it's really embarrassing, almost shameful to have to ask for assistance. And we're really trying to preserve the human dignity aspect with all of our partner agencies as we serve people. But food, transportation assistance, Voluntary Action Center provides that, the food bank provides the food. We've got opportunities for medication. Family Health Center provides an awful lot of health-related services, one of our funded partners. And so there are lots of services that are available. You just have to know where to go to find them.
Is there one issue that tends to be to put people over that line of being the working poor and then being in poverty that you see consistently?
Yeah, usually it is either the loss of a job, and unfortunately right now we've had 100 people laid off over at the Nordine plant in Boonville. That's going to affect Mid-Missouri tremendously. We see that somebody who has a medical problem and very expensive medical bills, especially with no benefits, can put you right over the edge. The most common request for service in our area and really across the state is help for utilities and rent assistance.
Thanks again to Tim Rich. Again, we have some of those resources on our website. You can check them out at komu.com. For a certain group, the impact of poverty is very different.
The majority of our students who live in our attendance area are from poverty, and it's definitely a distractor. If they're coming in and they haven't had breakfast in the morning, or if they haven't had a good lunch or meals over the weekends even, it's definitely going to affect their learning.
We'll talk to a local principal and get his take on how children deal with being poor. His answers might surprise you. Stick around. one group that stands out and pulls at our hearts when it comes to poverty is, of course, the children. Many of you expressed your wish that you could do more for your kids. We spoke to the principal of Benton Elementary in Columbia. He says a majority of the families in his school fall under the category of the working poor. And you travel obviously all around the community and the area, and a perception is that the parents, you know, aren't trying hard, aren't working, aren't really trying to do the best for their kids. That's obviously a misperception.
Absolutely, that's frustrating because my parents are trying very hard every day to do everything that they can for their kids. When you're working more than one job and doing lots of things, it's just hard to make ends meet. Most of these families have low-wage jobs, but more than one, and they're trying the best they can. You know, even when you look at all of the costs for these families, child care and whatnot, it's expensive. It's just really expensive, and they're trying their best to make ends meet, and they need some extra support, which we're glad we can give for them.
Are many of them what would be considered the working poor versus just those living off benefits per se?
Yes, I would say most of ours are working poor. They're families, very often single mothers who are doing the best they can with the resources that they have. I think most people may think that the kids understand that they're in poverty. Well, they don't. For them, this is just what life is like. The way I grew up at home is what I thought everyone's family was like. As you get older, you learn that that's not necessarily the case. So many of these students don't even know that they're growing up in poverty. They don't understand that not everyone needs to get food from the food bank, or not everyone gets buddy packs. For them, they just think that that's the way it is for everyone. So.
And we'll be back with some final thoughts as we head into the break, some of your thoughts on the holidays. We definitely want to thank those who have shared their stories with us, either in person or online. If you or someone you know could use some help, log on to our website, KOMU.com, for some resources and some contacts. We'll have a full interview with Tim Rich of the United Way and Benton Elementary Principal Troy Hogg. You can also continue the conversation always on our Facebook page.